Greetings, rabble rousers. My name is Jessa McLean. Welcome to Blueprints for Disruption, a weekly discussion dedicated to amplifying activism across Turtle Island. Together, we will examine tactics, explore motivations, and celebrate successes in disrupting the status quo. This podcast is a proud part of New Left Media. Welcome, listeners. If you haven't started paying attention to local politics, you might just want to start now. This episode of Blueprints of Disruption is centered on municipal politics. We've got elections coming up if you're living in Ontario, BC, Manitoba, or Prince Edward Island, and there are a lot of people working hard to make those votes count. These upcoming races certainly won't get the same exposure provincial and federal campaigns do. Let's be honest, it's often hard to even find out who's running in your ward or for your city council. But our next guest, Sam Hersh, is busy working with his team at Horizon Ottawa to put the spotlight back on local politics, and for good reasons. We've talked here on Blueprints many times of the barriers that exist in electoral politics. And we're not saying that municipal politics is without its issues. We'll get into that in our discussion with Sam, but it still remains a far more accessible avenue of politics that is become far more successful for independent people to run in. During the episode, Sam will describe what exactly the people at Horizons Ottawa are doing to reshape municipal politics. They're looking to make something that's far more democratic, more accessible, and most importantly, more progressive. Good morning, Sam. Thank you for joining us. Can you introduce yourself for the listeners?
Sure, yeah. Happy to be joining you this morning. And my name is Sam Hersh. I am, an organizer here in the city of Ottawa. I am on the board of directors for Horizon Ottawa and the coordinator for the organization, and have been living in Ottawa for the past almost 6 years now in Ontario. So,
We've talked before about some of your anti-convoy organizing and just briefly touched on the work that Horizon Ottawa has done, but I really wanted you to be able to dive deeper into that work. You guys look like you're really busy with the upcoming municipal elections. Can you give us an idea of, let's start at the beginning, how did Horizon Ottawa begin? What was this impetus to start something like this?
I think a lot of people thought that there was a sort of a gap in organizing, like progressive organizing at the municipal level in the city, and there was a void rather to be filled by an organization or that could do this work, and I think that's where the impetus came from. A lot of us, some of us were involved in the 2018 municipal election. And we saw that, I think as leftists, a lot of the way that we campaign, because we know that we're not the status quo, right? It's a lot harder for leftists to get elected. So I think how we really campaign is like grassroots campaigns, knocking on a lot of doors, and speaking to people face to face. And when it comes to, liberals or conservatives, not saying that they don't knock on doors, but it's just different type of campaigning, I think. And that's where leftists really excel. And at the municipal level, at the local level, it's really possible to win in that way. It's possible to, you actually can, knocking on doors and being on the ground really makes a lot more of a difference. Not saying that it doesn't make a difference in the provincial and federal scene, but it's a lot harder to influence, the electoral result through on the ground efforts because it's much more further removed from on the ground stuff. So we were like, it's really possible and it's also a sphere, I think, of electoral politics that the left has ignored for a long time. And it's how conservatives have gained power at the local level, I think, to a really effective degree. So we were like, we really need to start organizing on the left at the local level, and that's sort of really how the idea sort of came about.
Because I think maybe viewer or listeners don't need reminding, but there is no partisanship, so to speak, in municipal politics. So politicians don't have the backing, as much as we complain about the NDP sometimes on this show. Without that machinery behind you, it does become a lot more daunting of a task to do, especially if it's localized, right? You won't even have that wider riding support or, so definitely can see that there was a void there. Do you almost take the place of a party? Like what makes Horizon Ottawa different than, saying you've essentially got a party of candidates?
Yeah, and I think that's like a fair point. And I think we try to make it at, and on a personal level, honestly, I'm from Montreal originally, where there's in Quebec there are municipal political parties, like Projet Montréal. I'm from Montreal, maybe not the most progressive, but it's the center left center party in Montreal, and they've arguably done much better things than the previous administration under Denis Coderre. But I'm not opposed to municipal political parties. I think that I think a lot of people's views of political parties are sullied because of the federal and provincial level and party discipline, and I think that's a really toxic and can be a really toxic thing. But I do think at the base of it, like a party is a group of people coming together to collectively, pursue a common goal, and I think that's noble and good. And I think when we speak about nonpartisanship, a lot of the time, a lot of what that often veers towards is being a liberal, right? Like liberalism, right? The status quo. So I think that nonpartisanship.
I'm neither right or left, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we see that. Yeah, and we see that in places like in BC, where there are also municipal political parties. The only two jurisdictions are Quebec and BC, where we have the municipal, I guess they're called like electors organizations in BC, but we have the nonpartisan alliance in I think in Vancouver, and the nonpartisan alliance in Vancouver is a centrist, center-right municipal political party. So anyways, sorry to be veering off topic, but I think it's important to, because a lot of people are like, oh, political parties at the municipal level, blah, blah. But I think there's a case for it. But anyways, like you say, I think also not having political parties though at the municipal level makes it a lot easier for people who are independents, people who don't have that backing to actually make a stand and like have a chance at winning against more powerful people who might have a machine behind them, right? Because we know that conservatives, liberals, etc., are backing municipal candidates in different wards. Despite it, we say that it's nonpartisan, but I mean, like there's a lot of partisanry that comes in the backing of some candidates, and also in Ottawa.
We consider developers a party.
Yeah, and in Ottawa, I mean, we know that in the Ottawa context, at least, that there was a Jim Watson party, right? Basically, for the past 10 years, every single person all the time, if they were loyal to Jim Watson, they sided with him all the time. So, I mean, we could say as much as we want that it's not really partisan, but there is that sort of taking sides. But yeah, so I mean, we aim to, we're not necessarily a partisan organization. We don't act as a political party, but we do, or anything like that. We're just an advocacy organization that's trying to push for, progressive issues and also for progressives to get elected in Ottawa. And the way that we want to do that is through, helping people sort of build up the infrastructure that they need on a volunteer basis and like help with volunteers and things like that. And a lot of us who are involved have experience organizing in electoral politics and outside electoral politics, and want to use those skills to help build up those people, build up those campaigns, so that the left actually has a fighting chance in this municipal election and municipal elections to come, and also outside of municipal elections, as you referenced, because a big part of our goal is to, as I've said before, to bridge the gap between electoral politics and movement-based politics. And I think a lot of us, like you referenced in the NDP, have tried to do that for a long time, to great frustration. But it's something that we've really tried to do here in Horizon Ottawa, for sure.
Why is the focus on the municipal so important? As I'm scrolling through your feed on Twitter, Horizon Ottawa, and your website, you guys talk about a lot of issues that could be seen as even federal or provincial level issues, but obviously have a place in municipal politics, right? Transit, COVID protections, democratic reforms. So why, but obviously a lot of your energy is really spent on the local. Why is that such an important place to apply your energy and put pressure?
Yeah, I do think it's important to get involved in different levels of government for sure. But I do think that if we look at the past 2 years, or almost 3 years now since the pandemic began, especially if we look to the U.S. And other places, like where is power being won by the left? Mostly at the local level. Right, and it's much more difficult within the entrenched party system and that we have the federal and provincial level, and in the U.S. at the state and federal level or whatever to win. So we've seen a lot of breakthroughs from like the DSA at the local level in the U.S. And then on another even bigger scale around the world, especially in Europe. And sort of where we really got a lot of inspiration in Barcelona and Como and they are also allowed to have municipal sort of political parties there too in Barcelona. But still Barcelona and Como, it was a citizen-led platform, and now the mayor Ada Colau, who's been mayor for 2 terms now, was a former activist who used to occupy banks and who's now been the mayor of Barcelona for almost so over 2 terms now. So a lot of successes there, and I see like that's where the left is really making gains around the world. Obviously, there's other cases to be made now in Latin America where a lot of left-wing, center-left people are getting elected, but and also on another end, a lot of the issues that have come up during the pandemic, like policing, for example. Around George Floyd's murder. By police, that is a municipal level because those services are given municipally. And then that was a big issue that came up. Housing, obviously, around earlier on when there was a lot of rent strikes and things like that. So we really housing is obviously big thing at the municipal level. So a lot of issues that bread and butter issues to a certain extent that affect people on a day-to-day are municipal. A lot of the services, when you walk out your door, walk around your neighborhood, what you see, that's that's really municipal. And what we say to people all the time is, because I think a lot of people at the federal, provincial, they're like, oh well, they pretend to be experts, they pretend to be, or say they're better than everyone else. But at the municipal level, really the people who are experts are the people who live in their communities because they live in there every day. And I think it's much more easier because it's much closer and more immediate. And also, there's a bigger possibility at the municipal level to have a more open and direct democracy because it's so close to people. And there are issues obviously with consultation, but generally speaking, consultation around certain things at the local level are much more accessible for people.
I like that idea when you're talking about, you didn't use the word, but representation, because often, in provincial and federal, we elect the wealthy. Even on the left, we tend to defer to a certain kind of representation, the cream of the crop, so to speak, with a totally warped view on what that even is. But so you're kind of suggesting that on the municipal level, there's a better chance of actual representation, right? Like a mirror of the ward, of the riding. That's very promising. And, you're 100% right when you're talking about all these issues that we often do try to battle provincially and federally. It's, they are mostly on the ground municipal issues, budgetary issues, right? Like when we're talking about defunding the police, a lot of that comes at your city council motions and whatnot. So it's surprising that we have abandoned or, not dove in until more recently. You talked about working in 2018. I think we started to see a bit of a shift, but this year is something unprecedented. I've seen so many friends are running, so many great people that I know, activists are running at, whether it be for city councilor or school trustee. Are you excited by, the crop of candidates that Horizon Ottawa has managed to kind of help out or maybe even generate? I see you guys are on Twitter actively, pointing out gaps in the ballots. There's still seats to fill here. And so how's that going? Or should we be excited about some of these races?
Yeah, and just before I get into that, to a previous point, I mean, in terms of the issues at the municipal level, the other thing too is that a lot of the issues at the municipal level that should be municipal are really controlled by the province in Canada because of the Constitution. The municipalities are creatures of the province, and like we saw, recently, Doug Ford is going to implement these strong mayor powers that will give mayors a lot of power. In 2018, he just slashed Toronto City Hall in half, and it's quite egregious that like. So we saw the same thing at the provincial level. If the federal government could just do whatever they wanted to provinces and to legislatures and change the way people govern themselves, people would be outraged. So that's obviously something that has to change. But that's mostly at the provincial level, so obviously that's important too. And I think we need to talk more to our progressive legislatures from the NDP and push them more on trying to give municipalities more independence, because there's a lot of things that municipalities can use, like more revenue raising tools. Most of the revenue from tax revenue comes from property taxes. Like a lot of municipalities in the U.S. have a lot more things that they can do. So we really need to push people to devolve and decentralize power to the local level where it's needed a lot. So I just wanted to say that for sure. But in terms of the current, I think there's been some challenges. And I think a lot of us are further. We're a bit further than where we want it to be, I think. But in terms of moving forward, I mean, there's a lot of potential in this election to elect a lot of progressive, especially in Ottawa, where I think now 11 or so incumbents are not running again. There's some open seats, and there's a big possibility here. I mean, the mayor isn't running again, and I think that, like I was saying earlier, the Jim Watson party, I think the fact that he's not running again led a lot of other people to be like, oh, well, it's not going to be a fun time for me at City Hall next time around, so I'm not going to run again. So that's led to a lot of opportunity here. And I think also,
definitely.
Yeah, I think also to another point, I mean, talking about the NEP, I think, to a big reason, I think, too, why some of us are involved more municipally is I think we have a lot more sway over what happens, and part of, not a big part, but a significant part of why a lot of us have been involved in municipal politics has been a bit around disillusionment around the NDP, and the failure to win, but also the failure to win with progressive values, and the failure to sort of inspire people. And I think that's led a lot of people, like you said, a lot of people who might have ran for the NDP or might have done whatever to actually moving and trying to win power at the municipal level, because some of us are like, not that we think it's futile to organize with the NDP, because a lot of us are still doing that, but I think that is also a good reason why people, some leftists have moved to the municipal level instead, because they think there's more fruitful endeavor in organizing.
Can you talk a little bit more about that sway? How do you incorporate that into Horizon Ottawa's work to make sure members' voices are being heard? Like, why is that successful there? And obviously we're failing perhaps to do that at other levels.
Well, I think that a good number of us and we have over 600 members now, a lot of who are not
nice.
Just, yeah, no, it's good. A lot who are not just NDP members, right? There's also some Green Party folks, some former Liberals, etc. I think that's I know
no,
that's what happens
like,
at the that's what happens at the municipal level. Sometimes I think there's some sort of like strange bedfellows where people.
I mean, we do all have to work together at some point.
Yes. But I think a lot of us who come from political parties, especially me coming from the NEP, I think a lot of us got burnt by the party brass, the senior staff and whatnot. Of course, respect a lot of those people still, but some, and we wanted to make sure that our organization was more horizontal, no pun intended, and that it didn't really reflect the decision-making structures that exist in the NDP. We didn't want to repeat that like to some extent, sometimes often toxic structures. So we wanted to make sure that and it has its challenges too. And I think having like a more horizontal decision-making structures makes some things more difficult. I think to a certain extent, some things have to be, hierarchical just to make decision-making easier sometimes. Like we have a board, for example, and that's also required by law to have a board for nonprofit. So we had to do that. But we, like I said, we really wanted to make sure that we didn't repeat a lot of those structures that exist, and make sure that there was, as we want to have a more democratic city, a more decentralized power, we wanted to also, repeat those that same structure that we want to implement into our own organizations.
Yeah, like I sat down with Tim Ellis the other day for an episode, and he talked about how important the processes are. I know you guys do touch a lot on different policy items, so you're managing to kind of do both in this space, which is, kudos. And 600 members is nothing to sneeze at all. I mean, that is very impressive, especially, towards a municipal end, right? That's a very kind of defined demographic there in Ottawa. So that really is amazing. Now, do you have a candidate for mayor? I mean, Ottawa is poised to kind of maybe take on some really big issues. We've seen free transit take traction and some other really progressive issues that are, top of mind. Is it hopeful to replace Jim Watson with something better?
Yeah, and I mean, we haven't released our official endorsements yet, but we have internally.
Okay.
We have internally endorsed someone for mayor, and there is a really progressive candidate running for mayor, is Catherine McKenney. So I mean, I'm not going to say who. I mean, it's probably obvious to many who we're going to endorse. But internally, we have made some endorsements, but we're only going to be releasing that because we're planning a bigger press conference, et cetera, later on. But yeah, I think people are. I mean, I think there are some challenges in their campaign, but I think people generally are excited about the opportunity to elect someone like Catherine, and it makes a huge difference. I mean, we see what's happening compared to Toronto, and not that I'm knocking down Toronto, but right now there's no. There is another candidate against Gill, or whatever his name is. I forget the last name, against Tory, but it's not as a sure thing. And also, like, obviously Tory is an incumbent mayor, so it's harder to beat him. So with Jim Watson stepping down, there's a lot of opportunity there. And obviously there's another candidate, Mark Sutcliffe, who has come forward, who is we want low taxes, et cetera, conservative type person, trying to be that. So he's still someone who's going to be significantly...
That didn't sound like you were endorsing him at all. So.
No. But he's going to be, tough to beat still probably. But I think, people are excited about Catherine's campaign, and we're going to do what we can to make sure, like, the most progressives across the city are elected. And I think that's important too. I mean, with the new mayor powers, it sort of changes the race a bit, but it's still important to, we want to still have as many progressive local councillors as possible on council too. So like the local ward races still matter, and that's really where we're focusing a bit more of our capacity. And with other organizations too, like we're working with groups like Acorn in Ottawa and Climate Justice Ottawa and other groups across the city to try and push forward that agenda.
Let's talk about some of the barriers that exist, when we're talking about municipal politics. So we've hinted towards it at the beginning of the interview. Developers and developer money in general, capital, right? That's you talked about Toronto. That's primarily why Tory will be so difficult to beat for as long as he wants to keep power. But he's not alone. Acorn released a report that disclosed the amount of donations that city councillors in Toronto were receiving from developers. And as a whole, it was 34%. 34% of all donations that went into those races came from developers. And we assume that they go to the right or, certain councillors. But you take a look at Christian Wong Tam, so-called progressive, took over 20% from developers. So, how do we stop that? So even when we get progressives in there, we can argue about the merits of that. But and they're still taking money from developers. 20% of your campaign, that's a lot more money to raise if you refuse that. So what do we do there?
So, I think, not to toot our own horn here, but we've been really effective. Our organization has been really effective on that front. And we advocate on many different issues, but the issue that we launched on was the developer donation issue, the developer influence at City Hall, and really, stemming from one councillor in particular who really made this a big issue in the city is at the beginning of Sean Menard, who's a progressive councillor. I worked on his campaign in 2018 with another friend to co-manage the campaign. That was a big issue for us, and since Sean is a big supporter of our organization, for example, and other councillors, but he accepted no developer donations on his campaign. And there's actually a decent amount of urban councillors who accept no money from developers in 2018 at least. But we've really we released a report in 2020, similar report, and have a database online of you can look up your councillor and see how much money they took from developers, and then the list of the individual developer, and it's quite extensive. So and since that point in May of 2020 when we launched officially, we existed a bit before that in 2019, but we have been talking about that issue a lot. We've been many votes. We've done the analysis, and we also live tweet a bit less now because of the election, but we live tweet most city council meetings and live tweet other meetings like the planning committee, and make a lot of those points. So that has really gotten us a big following, and sort of has allowed us to sort of lead the narrative to an extent on this conversation. This has obviously been a phenomenon for a long time and has been a long studied thing. If anyone is interested, Robert McDermott is a really good academic who writes about this issue, and has a lot of good papers on this, discussion policy papers. But it's just like we're pushing it again and again and again for the past 4 years, and we've gotten even Mark Sutcliffe, who is the low taxes whatever candidate, he has come out and has been like, I'm not going to accept developer donations on my campaign. Will he actually do it? I don't know, and that's why later on in the campaign we're going to call for candidates to release their donations over $100, because those are public. So we're going to ask candidates to release a list of that, because we want to make sure that that's not happening. But yeah, accepting developer donations is a huge issue, because obviously fundraising is a hard thing to do on a campaign, especially on a smaller campaign. And we know that it's not as much money to fundraise on a municipal campaign, but it's still more difficult to, again, when you don't have that party apparatus behind you. So if you get that out of the way, it's a lot easier to run a campaign. For example, some councillors, like previous councillors here, like Jan Harder, who's a big darling of the development industry here in Ottawa, just has a big fundraiser with about 20 developers who donate the max, and then you're almost basically done your campaign, right? So it's a huge advantage, a huge disadvantage for progressives, a huge advantage for those folks who are connected to the industry. So and later on we're also going to release a policy paper during the campaign around different things policies that should be put forward One, mainly that the contribution limit should be lowered. I mean, it's insane that we have the same contribution maximum limit. Well, now it's different now, I guess. It's $3,300 at the provincial level, which is crazy, absolutely crazy. But it's still insane that just before that, we had a $1,200 max at the provincial level, a $1,200 max at the municipal level, when the budgets for spending limits for municipal campaigns are far, far, far less than, I mean, a spending limit on a provincial campaign is like 100 could be 150 grand. On a municipal campaign, it could be as small as 20, 25 grand. So you only need a couple of people to donate the max to get it. So it's a huge issue, a huge disadvantage. And obviously there's the perception, at least, of that they influence decisions that happen at City Hall. Many city councils try to deny that, but it's obviously not the case. They also try to compare it to unions, right? Or they try to compare it to community grassroots organizations, saying like, well, they also have influence at City Hall. It's like, not to the same degree, they don't. So, yeah.
No, and that's what you find, though, when we do go in and do reforms around donations, that corporations are treated the same as unions, which, you know, to folks on the left, we know why they do that, why they tie those two together, but it's asinine because one is a collective of workers and the others are just, you know, profit mongers. But
there are a lot of problems with unions, of course, as we know, and with the union leadership, but it's not the same as a corporation. So
let's touch on labor just for a second. I know I've seen a little bit of the Toronto and York Region Labor Board have been gearing up around municipal elections. Have you cooperated with organized labor? Are we doing a collective effort over in Ottawa?
So we have, throughout our, the past 4 years, we have, especially during the convoy, we worked a lot with PSAC, for example, here, the PSAC National Capital Region, around combating the convoy, and we have worked together and are planning on doing some work together on the municipal election. We've reached out to other unions throughout the past 4 years and have supported other labor actions, like when hotel workers went on strike here during the pandemic, and a lot of other QP 4600 university academic workers. But the district labor council here in Ottawa is a little bit less active generally when it comes to politics. So it's unfortunate, and it's been difficult to try to get them on board. We have reached out, we have done outreach and things like that, but it's a little bit more. They're less active than the Toronto Labor Council and like the Peel District Labor Council, etc. So that's unfortunate, because we obviously think that labor should be involved, and that there's an important coalition that exists, and labor needs to flex the muscle that they have to organize here. Also, the ATU too is another organization that we've worked with, the local here, the transit union, and trying to do more stuff with them. But yeah, it's obviously easier when you have labor on your side, because they have certain resources that can help not only our organization but candidates too, and obviously it would benefit them to have progressives elected, as a lot of them are aware of that, obviously. So.
Yeah, well, a lot of municipal workers are unionized, thankfully. I know that there's a battle there always, and to hear how quickly one can hit the maximum, a little bit of donations would also go a long way, but people power, is obviously pivotal there. So how do you, in times of COVID still, I let people try to pretend that it's over, but let's be realistic. You're going to need to knock on a lot of doors. How do you continue to draw volunteers out in these times? And, how are you getting people to get excited and volunteer on these campaigns?
So I think for most of our existence, we've existed really online. So now we're starting to go door to door, and it's interesting because it's the first time that we've been really doing it and doing it. But the response.
Well, not your first time, but Horizon.
Not my first time. Yeah,
right?
Yeah. I've been door to door many times. But Horizon Ottawa's first time, and the response has been pretty good, and we've gotten people who are excited to go knock on doors, because I think people are really excited at the potential of electing a lot of progressives this time around in Ottawa. People are inspired by the municipal election and the possibilities that exist there, because I think that people are burnt out also too. It's like I think that maybe a couple months ago, year ago, people were a little bit more excited, but not saying that people are not excited, but it is, people are tired, and people are especially tired of, um, like, people sometimes feel like it's futile, especially in these times. And I try to, I try to really convince myself every day of, let's do this. But it's hard sometimes, especially in these times. But I do remain hopeful because, what else do we have? And as well as our hope and the hope of collective community. And I really draw a lot of inspiration from our volunteers, our members, and the work that I see other people do in these like difficult and trying times. And I really try to make that motivate me to continue this work, because it's really easy to, especially in these times, phone it in and be like, well, and especially around public health is something that we've really been pushed a lot throughout the pandemic, because because the local chief medical officer of health in Ontario municipalities have so much power to do things that they can actually disregard provincial orders, but they haven't done anything. So it's easy to feel ignored, etc. But we just gotta keep pushing and be those motivators, because you can be sure that there are a lot of people who are like, what's the point? And we have to be the people to be like, what, there is a point, and we need to keep pushing, and we know things are hard, but look how much great work other people are doing, and we need to support that, or push people to do similar work in a way that doesn't burn people out, because I think there's obviously that aspect. People can only do what they can do and whatnot, but yeah.
Yeah, that what's the point mentality also obviously trickles into voter turnout, right? So I took a quick look at Ottawa in 2018, and it's, Ottawa's not terribly unique. Municipal politics tend to have a much lower voter turnout. And, there's some arguments that quite often campaigns use inaccessible language or uninspiring language. It's often centered on property taxes, which, even though you will pay that as a renter, it doesn't register in that same way. What's Horizon Ottawa doing to, there's 60 odd % of eligible voters that don't think that there's a point. So I guess it's similar into getting volunteers to come out, but perhaps you can talk a little bit how you can do a better job than that. Then, our major political parties are failing at and engaging those same folks too.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of us in campaigns here have felt a bit of a lull here in the summer. I think it's a lot, and I've definitely re-experienced that. It's difficult. It's more difficult to get people involved in the summertime, especially now when things are a little bit more open, when the restrictions are lower. They shouldn't be, but they are. So people are a lot more excited to get out to their cottage or do whatnot. And, if they have a cottage to go to, a lot of people obviously don't. I don't. A lot of the people whose doors we knock don't, tenants, etc. But other than that, small aspect. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is changing the mentality of how we, and this is how we've worked on different campaigns in the city, changing the mentality of how you approach where you go door knock. I think on a lot of NDP campaigns, not just NDP, other campaigns that I've worked on, where we go to places where people vote, right? We don't go to places to grow the electorate, where people don't vote, but they should and they would vote for us. And that's where we have to go, because if we don't go there, if we continue to go where people vote, then it continues to the continuation of this vicious circle where oh well, those people don't vote, but the reason they don't vote is because nobody goes and inspires them and gets them to go vote. And I think that's a big misconception, that a lot of people get angry at people who didn't vote. And a lot of people don't vote for multiple reasons. A lot of people don't vote because they don't have the time to care about politics, because maybe they're working multiple jobs because they're poor and working class. People maybe just don't feel inspired enough by the political agenda a platform that people are putting forward. I personally really believe that it's not the job of people to go vote, it's the job of political parties and politicians, council candidates, mayoral candidates, to inspire those people enough to go out and vote. And it's really frustrating to me when I hear people talk about shame people for not voting for whatever reason, because I think people have good reasons to not vote. I do, but even me, I have my skepticism of electoral politics, and that's why I engage in politics outside of electoral politics. But it's frustrating to hear people get angry at people who don't vote for whatever reason.
I think that speaks to also the consultant class we've talked about a lot, where we're so deeply involved, especially like career politicos. It is everything that they do, this numbers game, and they just cannot imagine how anybody outside of that wouldn't engage, right? Because they spend all of their energy in these political spaces. But those political spaces are not inclusive of obviously a huge portion of our electorate. Like so when you guys go door to door, how often do you hear? Because I know that we operated like this in our writing, where we were going places. I'm like, what? We've never polled these people? Well, we need polling information at the very least. So we would go, and you're the first politician that's ever knocked on our door. Like, and I've lived here for 24 years. And we were shocked, because we understand the money that's behind other campaigns. So it's not just the NDP. Like, literally, there's like no-go zones for more traditional campaigns. So what's it like when you go into neighborhoods that have not been engaged? Like, are those rewarding conversations? Are you generating some hope there, some involvement?
Yeah, I think people are very thankful that, the other week we went to go knock in a neighborhood in the East End, and, people were very grateful that we were there. We were talking about developer influence. We weren't going on behalf of a candidate at that time, but, and they were in a particular ward where that particular councillor took a lot of money from developers. So, people are thankful that we're there, and especially on other campaigns. For example, just as a small example, on Sean Menard's campaign in 2018 in Capital Ward in Ottawa, people are often like, well, you shouldn't, students don't vote as much, blah, blah. But we, on Sean's campaign, the final result, we won by 300 votes, and we knocked doors in the local university there, Carleton University, or knocked doors or went out on the advance poll on election day. And out of around 380 votes, 300 students voted for Sean, because we were the only people that were there to speak to them, and we won by that many votes. So it was a very
I love that
tight,
story.
Like, yeah, so it really does matter, because there's a lot of especially at the municipal level, door knocking really matters, because there's a lot of time where people, you shouldn't go there, those people don't vote. But if you go there, they might. So.
And there's going to be so many people who have worked on elections who can relate to this, because it doesn't matter what campaign I've worked on. You're cautioned into not going into bad neighborhoods. And obviously that term carries so much classism, racism in it. But generally, the neighborhoods that you were most warned against going into generated the best results, not just like number wise, which you gave a great example as to, some place that had normally been dismissed ended up being the turning point of an entire campaign, right? But the conversations that you end up having, they're often eye-opening, especially if you've not been exposed to various levels of poverty and whatnot. So it's so encouraging to see not just one campaign doing it, but, Horizon Ottawa kind of spreading that different way of door knocking, because it's been incredibly successful in south of us as well, where, Democrats and whatnot, the squad rely on that blanket, like, knock on every door, have real conversations. Don't just get a number when you're there, right? Are you a 1, a 2, a 3, and a 4? Like, are you a supporter or not? Bye. That's candidate school 101 for all parties at the moment. So, and I believe you're right. I believe that's where we're losing people.
And it's just it's interesting to think of it now, but when we door knock, right, and that's a good point where you bring up, because we try to do persuasive canvassing, have conversations with people, and don't just talk at them and then be like, this is our platform, or are you going to vote for us? Bye. we actually do things, and we ask people at the end of the conversation, before we go into the voting, we talk to them about a policy, and then we say, what do you think about that? And then they're actually engaged in conversation, like, oh, you're asking me what I think about it? And it's funny to think about it now, but that ask is, to some, innovative because it's never been really done before, right? And like, you're like, oh, what do you think about that? You're asking me what I think about that? So it's and something taken obviously from the Bernie Sanders campaign, really. But yeah, it's we actually treating voters as though they're beings who are more than just a number, thinking, talking, actually care about politics. And we're not, we shouldn't be telling people what to think. We should be asking them what they think about different policies. So.
Like, imagine the money you guys save actually listening to voters rather than paying somebody to bring 20 of them into a room and ask them very structured questions and then basing your entire policy around it. Like, it's just such a novel idea. Like, that is democracy at its roots, right? So the fact that we sit here and be like, oh, what a novel idea, because a lot of people are going to hear that and go, yeah, that's definitely not how I've been taught to canvass. So let that be a lesson for folks. You don't.
And we don't win all the time. We don't win all the time, obviously. But it is a way to. I think campaigning differently is important, and change the way we campaign. And obviously, it's obviously important too to go to those neighborhoods where people vote as well, and we do that as well. But it's also important to mix up the strategy and go to, community housing buildings, etc.
Well, I'll challenge you there, though, Sam, because winning, like, especially on the left, you have to break away from the like black and white, we won, we lost. Because if there's growth and you've introduced conversations where there hadn't been any and ideas where there had not been, solutions before, that is winning, right? That is part of this larger battle. So
that's what I meant. That's what I meant.
Payout there.
That's sort of what I meant by saying that. Like, we don't always win, but it's, like I think a lot of people, when you bring up Bernie Sanders and you talk about how that campaign was successful, and people are like, well, Bernie didn't win. Well, it's like, okay, well, he didn't win per se, but he inspired a lot of people and changed the way that people campaign across the country and opened the Overton window on things like free tuition and other stuff. So in some respects, it's a victory in the way that people do things now. I mean, you'll see a lot of former high up NDP staffers be like, well, Bernie didn't win and things like that. It's like, well, change the way that we do things. So that's makes a big difference. So I do agree with you.
Yeah, I just don't want folks to be discouraged, because we do run a lot of, quote unquote, losing elections, but the battle is long. And so, yeah, just how does Horizon Ottawa, how are they going to look post-October? How are they going to measure their success? What is, your ideal outcome? What will you settle for? What's your worst case scenario?
Well, I think the ideal outcome is to have a progressive majority on council. And obviously that doesn't always...
What's that number?
So there's 24 councillors, and so 13 would be the majority, and hopefully have more. And that doesn't just mean, getting everyone who we want elected. There's also councillors who are not great, but if they're there, it's not the end of the world, because I think with a better council, they can vote in a different way, right? Because under Jim Watson, we've seen a lot of councillors not actually have agency. And that's their fault too, right? For just going along with whatever he's saying and not actually, because I think being a politician is what you want, what you make of it. You can either be someone who sits in the chair and does whatever you're told for 4 years and be lazy, or you can actually organize.
It's called courage.
Yeah, exactly. But there's also the measure in terms of actually the opposite. And we're seeing this, I think, for the first time in a long time, that the actual opposition against the status quo in the city is coming from the left or the center left, and not the right. And we saw that in the by-election in 2020 when we helped out a candidate there. And there's a by-election in 2020 here and in 2019, but in 2019 and 2020 we actually put forward significant challenges from the left through Horizon Ottawa. So that's also important, and I think a lot of people are seeing this election in 2022 for Ottawa and it might be different in the Toronto context and different cities, as the changed election. And it's true, there's a lot of councillors stepping down, and there's a lot of opportunity here. But like, as you said, it's a longer fight, and I think a lot of people, including myself, have put a lot of effort into this election and are sort of short-sighted in that way. And thinking in ways of just about electoral politics is also obviously short-sighted too. But I mean, it's for me too. It's often hard to think in a longer-term way, because you're like, well, the planet's burning. The IPCC report, I said we only have X number of years to change things, and now at this point we're just mitigating things. So it's hard sometimes to be like, well, if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it? Because we don't have time to do it later on. But so having an immediate measure of success is what a lot of people look at. But I also think that, we've also changed the conversation when it comes to developer influence in this city. We've changed the conversation when it's come to donations. The fact that we've gotten multiple candidates, major candidates here, to say that they're not going to accept developer donations. It's one of the biggest issues in this election.
Yeah, I love how you've made it taboo. Like, that's, it may not be on the books as a rule that you can't take from developers, because, that would obviously probably limit funds from elsewhere that we could use. But you've essentially made it, taboo and something that is going to be part of their campaign messaging.
Exactly. So I think there are those metrics.
That's already an accomplishment.
Yeah, and so I think there are those metrics of success that are like you can measure based on numbers, but there's also metrics of success that you can measure based off, narrative and how you've changed the conversation. I think that's something that's really important. I
know you talked about, you've putting a lot of energy into the election and a lot of hope. And I think just election cycles do that, with that, give you that extra sense of urgency, right? Because there's a set deadline and very tangible results that could be achieved. So I totally get that. But that's definitely not all Horizon Ottawa does, right? These elections are usually far between, say for a by-election. You folks did a lot of organizing around the convoy. So you're not putting all your eggs in the electoral basket. You are combating the far right in other ways. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think this speaks also to that sort of connection with electoral politics and the connection with what being a politician is too, right? Because I think it's important, like, you need to get reelected, etc., but you need to use your influence to advocate for different things that aren't just about electoral politics. And that's sort of what we were also pushing city councillors to do too. And I mean, when the convoy happened, and it's still happening, things like that. I mean, there are a far right group that has set up shop and have purchased a church in the city to have a permanent base of operations. So it's very scary, and we're trying to do all we can to defeat that. So it's hard to think about the election when that's happening at the same time, because I think that you can't, to a lot of respects, I think you can't always fight fascists or the far right at the ballot box, because they don't care about elections. We've seen this in the U.S. too, right? They will say that election was rigged, or they'll take power through means of violence, and we've seen this too with obviously throughout history with the Nazis or whoever, right? So they don't care about elections. So we have to have different tactics that aren't just about electoral politics. But I obviously think that we should use both, because obviously the far right gains power through elections too, so we can't ignore that either. And I think it's foolish. I know a lot of people talk about just ignoring electoral politics because they think it's a waste of energy, and I can, I can see where they're going there, but I think it's foolish to ignore both realms. I think it's foolish for people involved in electoral politics to ignore the external outside of electoral politics, and I think it's foolish on the other way around too, because we need to think of how do we gain power. And at least for us, I think like for now, the most convenient way to gain power is at the municipal level for the left, and on an electoral basis, because that's the most directly democratic, and local election. Municipalism really is sort of something that I've adhered to in the past 2 years and have learned about and things like that, and that's sort of what Horizon Ottawa stems out of. But that also extends to outside of electoral politics, like I said, and through that work, and I'm sort of getting away from the initial question, but through that work, and getting involved with groups who don't normally are movement-based groups. We've also gotten support of those groups and some of those folks who never have been involved in elections before or never wanted to be involved in elections, who are actually being like, you know what, there are this group and these councillors who support our movement, so we're going to in turn support them as well. So, and I mean, that's important. I think it's important to bring up, Sarah Jama as somebody who is running now in Andrew Horvath's seat in Hamilton Centre, as someone who really embodies that bridging that gap between electoral politics and movement-based politics. A lot of people who don't like electoral politics will support her campaign because she embodies those sort of principles of bringing movements into those spaces, and because those people know how to organize. I mean, and I think that's something that a lot of senior staff they ignore movement-based people because they're like, they're activists, blah, blah, but those folks know how to organize, so we need to bring them in and make sure that, and they have a lot of energy, and make sure that they get involved. So.
Well, yeah, when we talk about the urgency of things that need to get done and the amount of people that have disengaged, right? And, Tim said the other day, if we want to change everything, we need everybody. So finding folks that know how to bring people together and, yeah, not just like fighters, right? Folks that you can kind of will charge the way, and that allows other people to be braver. And I think that goes back to your point too on, having a majority in numbers in council is great, but sometimes just a really good mayor or leader can help create the space where folks can make better decisions, or surrounded by just a few more comrades that, have bold ideas that get people excited. I really love the way that Horizon Ottawa seems to be redefining what a politician is, because that has such an ugly word to it, or connotation to it. Most people, even when I ran as a candidate, I did not like being referred to as a politician. It just, that most people's vision of that. But if instead, folks were shown standing side by side, like quite literally against fascists in their streets, I mean, that starts to reshape what you then can start to demand of other politicians at provincial and federal levels, right? Where we've not seen, we're very upset that Pierre is standing alongside the convoy, but at the same time, we're demanding that our leaders do the same, just for better values, right? So it's not that, I think to a degree, we're seeing how effective that is on the right when the politicians do take even horrid stances, but there's
the anti-establishment angle there that's important, I think, and that, but as say, a lot of more activists need to be politicians, and a lot more politicians need to be activists.
Are you running?
No, I'm not this time at least. But on the Polyev front, I mean, obviously there's something to say about those quote-unquote movements that, they represent the rich and the powerful, really, and people who are taking advantage of working class people, right? And but I see your point for sure. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there needs to be more city council. Like, your job is not just being a legislator, someone who sits there and is sort of a technocrat at City Hall. I think that's what a city councillor, to an extent, has become, and we see this a lot at city council meetings. Like, it's the first time because I used to work at City Hall, the first time I really experienced like certain council meetings, it's really jarring to see how much council relies on like staff's decisions and like staff, whatever, nonpartisan, mostly, not really in Ottawa where they really were sort of beholden to the mayor, but you're a councillor, you're fighting for something, you want your motion to be passed, the mayor goes to staff and says, what does staff think about this? And like, we don't support it, and then all the council votes against it. It's quite jarring, honestly, and we need politicians to be, and especially at the city level, because there's that level of accessibility that doesn't really exist at the federal and provincial level, to be those champions for their communities, but also champions for people across the city. And I think that's what's really lacking too from municipal politicians, is that vision for the entire city. And councilors often come down on other councilors for being like, well, you need to focus on your ward, you need to focus on this, you need to focus on that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with a politician having a city councilor having a stance on something like Palestinian human rights, for example. Politicians need to use their influence, all the influence that they have, to push for progressive issues at whatever level exists. I mean, we've saw this when Bernie Sanders was mayor of Vermont. I mean, he went on trips, for example, internationally to different cities all the time to see what kind of stuff they were doing. We need more of that solidarity, between cities, between progressives around the world, and getting people elected at the local level is part of that.
And there's just a level of influence. What happens in Ottawa is not contained in Ottawa, right? So watching folks stand up against the convoy has an effect on other people to do the same. And the reverse is also true, right? Bad policies also then are carried on from city to city. I know here in Toronto, if Toronto does it, York Region will do it, but York Region will never do it until Toronto does it. And Toronto usually needs Vancouver or somebody else to do it first and prove that it'll work. And it's important, even if you had one really progressive city that could, be an example for other municipalities, the same way we use union negotiations to say that they will influence non-unionized workers by raising the bar. So I hope you folks are successful in Ottawa in raising that bar and kind of engaging folks that haven't been engaged. But I think it's also a good example to replicate in other cities. I know Progress Toronto does some similar work, and it's really encouraging to see a lot of grassroots work on these municipal elections. Toronto is not shaping up all that excitingly, but I am still excited for the first time in a long time about municipal elections. And I think that has a lot to do with seeing folks like you doing so much work behind the scenes and just how much it's providing a new example of ways to do things. So it has incredible potential, Sam. Is there anything I didn't ask you that, you would like to talk about?
No, that's good. I think it also speaks to, just briefly, like the way that the pandemic has sort of shifted the way that people think about where power comes from in politics. And we see people because of the pandemic, hopefully not multiple coming, but the pandemic, they've been really local. They've been sitting and working from home, so they're in their own community more often. They've experienced their local community a lot more, so that has led them sort of to think more on a local level, I think, too, and that has really changed the importance, I think, that people place on municipal politics in their life, because they walk out on the street, they see a thing that bothers them, and for example, so I think the pandemic has really pushed a lot of people to think about municipal politics in a different way, and where we can really change things and gain power and whatnot. So
I'm here for that. I hope that rings true in the results in October, and I hope you guys are successful in however you decide to measure that, But thank you so much, Sam, for taking the time to come in and talk about this. I hope this, helps other municipal campaigns. Perhaps you can just kind of join Horizon Ottawa's little network there and glean some knowledge off of them, even if you're outside of the city. And really good luck to anybody who's put their name forward. It's incredibly brave, and a special thanks to the folks that are supporting them. Thank you again, Sam.
Thanks for having me on.
With organizations like Horizons Ottawa helping to equalize the playing field even more, municipal elections are becoming a winnable battleground for an often overlooked place of influence, right? Transit and police budgets could be transformative for communities. So to the friends of Blueprints that are running, we see you. I encourage you, and I thank you so much for doing what you're doing. Jay Woodruff is running in Clarence, Rockland. Akua Freepong is running for school trustee in Whitby. Emma Cunningham, school trustee in Pickering. And Christine Wickner is running for council in British Columbia. hope I am missing some of you, and there are many more great folks looking to cause good trouble while they're running for the upcoming municipal races. So again, good luck, and thank you for putting yourself out there. That's not easy. And thank you to Horizon Ottawa and Sam Hersh for sharing their time. Like in all things that we do, there's a team behind Blueprints of Disruption. I want to give a big thank you to our producers, Santiago Hello Quintero and Jay Woodruff. Our show is also made possible by the support of our listeners. So if you appreciate our content and would like to become a patron, please visit us at www.patreon.com/BP of Disruption. So if you know of any work that should be amplified or want to provide feedback of our show, please reach out to us on Twitter at BP of Disruption. Blueprints of Disruption is a project of New Left Media, an independent employee-owned company.